Hello and welcome to this week's Inside the Americas. I'm Thomas Waterhouse. Here's what's coming up for you in the programme. We take a closer look at the opposition leaders flying the flag in the growing protest movement against the Venezuelan president and his government. A year since the flames and smoke of a mammoth wildfire blackened a trail of destruction in Fort McMurray, we take you back to the Canadian city to see how locals are coming to terms with the natural disaster. And could this dry expanse of sand and stones in the north of Chile hold the key to answering one of science's oldest questions? Is there life on Mars? But first, the wave of protests against Nicolas Maduro shows no sign of running out of steam. Anti-government demonstrations have raged for over 4 weeks now and claimed several lives. In his weekly TV show called Sundays with Maduro, the president offered his fellow countrymen a hike in the minimum wage and the offer of free homes for the poorest in a bid to calm tensions. But his call for the constitution to be rewritten has sparked international condemnation. And through all this, the opposition pushes on with its call for fresh elections. Mariam Saab takes a look now at who's leading the pack in that ever-growing protest movement.
Political figures and protesters from other walks of life march side by side to turn the page on the regime of Nicolas Maduro. Two-time presidential candidate Enrique Capriles is one of the protest leaders. Capriles is the governor of Miranda State, next to neighbouring Caracas. On April 7th, the opposition leader was banned by the national controller from holding political office for 15 years. The improper management of donations from abroad emerged as one of the so-called administrative irregularities used to justify the ban. Capriles denied overstepping legal bounds and denounced the ban as a political manoeuvre designed to block his candidacy for 2018. Since the legislative election of December 2015, the opposition has dominated parliament. Julio Borges has been at the head of Venezuela's National Assembly since January. A lawyer and the founder of the Justice First Party, Borges has rallied Venezuelans to rebel against what he calls a coup after several attempts by Maduro to stonewall parliament.
What Nicolas Maduro is proposing is that we will never be able to vote freely for free and democratic elections.
Another key opposition figure is Leopoldo Lopez. For the last 3 years, the former mayor and founder of the Popular Will Party has been held in a military prison after being sentenced to 14 years behind bars for inciting violence during anti-Maduro demonstrations. Despite his incarceration, the flames of rebellion he fanned are still burning, and in his place, his wife now holds a torch for the cause. Maduro's enemies are mounting across the political spectrum. Even one-time friends are now flipping their allegiances.
There are now Chavists marching against Maduro, whereas before they didn't take a stand. Today they're demonstrating alongside his political opponents.
The socialist model set up by Hugo Chavez is falling apart under his successor. Maduro's popularity has reached new lows as Venezuela sinks deeper into an economic and political crisis.
Moving on, it's been another tumultuous week for Donald Trump, especially in the field of foreign policy, after relations with Russia soured over Washington's first military action against the Assad regime. Trump has held a productive telephone conversation with President Putin to discuss peace in Syria, and as well as meeting the Palestinian leader and inviting the Philippines' firebrand President Rodrigo Duterte for talks at the White House, Trump has also said he'd be honoured to meet the North Korean leader if the circumstances were right. Well, for more, let's bring in James Andre from our international desk. James, it's been clearly a rollercoaster week for Donald Trump. It's been pretty hard to read what his real intentions are, hasn't it?
Well, no, it's pretty much impossible. All the analysts are looking at this and saying, right, so, for example, he's talking to Mahmoud Abbas, he's saying, right, we can find a solution. Abbas's aides are saying that he's being constructive, but on the other side, he's telling Israel that he wants to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and he's also telling them that they shouldn't carry on with colonization. It's difficult to see what he's doing there. Difficult to see what he's doing with the Chinese and the North Koreans as well. He's saying that Xi Jinping is now a very respectable man after having said that they were currency manipulators and that the attacking China during this whole campaign. North Korea, he's now wanting to eventually meet with Kim Jong-un. So it's very, very complicated to understand where exactly he's trying to go. Now, if you take the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, some people are starting to say you can't broker peace in the Middle East in the same way you broker a real estate deal in New York.
Of course, Kim Jong-un isn't the only controversial world leader that Trump's now saying he wants to meet.
Absolutely. It's pretty much all of them. A lot of the world's most controversial leaders are now being praised by Donald Trump. And that includes, for example, Rodrigo Duterte. Rodrigo Duterte is known to have asked his own population to crack down on drug dealers, thus calling for the murder of Filipino citizens. And in the same stride, he's also, for example, used very harsh words against Barack Obama. So this is very much a shift. And what a lot of people are saying in the human rights community, defense community, they're saying that, in the short term, this might pay, but in the long term, America is turning its back on its own values.
And James, how can we explain this change of tack from Donald Trump and his administration?
Very much boils down to this whole America First principle. It appears that from being the leader of the free world, it seems the new president of the United States has decided that it was America First, that the idea was to broker deals with whoever, regardless of consequences and regardless of human rights track record. Now, they say this is going to be more efficient, and they say you shouldn't cut off from anyone if you want to be able to pressure them. For example, indeed, the Trump administration says that it's managed to have a human rights activist, American activist, released from Egypt by brokering a deal with Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, which Barack Obama never managed to do. Now, indeed, this is a complete shift, and it's something very new.
James Andre from our International Affairs Desk, thank you very much. Time now for our statistic of the week, which is 88,000. That was the total number of residents evacuated from their homes a year ago when a huge wildfire broke out in and around the Canadian city of Fort McMurray. And as you'll see in this next report, on that first anniversary of the huge blaze, locals are still struggling to rebuild their lives.
It was 1 year ago that a forest fire engulfed the small community at Fort McMurray. Nearly 100,000 people living in this part of Western Canada were forced to flee their homes. Today, the 6,000 square kilometers of charred forest and destroyed neighborhoods are burning reminders of the disaster. When Stephen Menard was able to return home 1 month later, his house, like those of his neighbors, was nothing but a pile of rubble. He chose to rebuild it himself.
So it's been part of a healing process for the family, building our own home. It's helped us considerably get over some of our losses. It's helped us deal with some of the losses of our neighbors and our friends as well.
With the arrival of spring, construction has resumed, and authorities say they are confident they will be able to rebuild some 2,500 buildings that went up in flames.
When you get people back home, they start to put their roots down again and start to get the ability to see that future. And so I think that this year is the hard year, that every year hereafter will get a little bit easier for people.
But the fire proved to be a financial blow to Fort McMurray. Entirely dependent on the oil and gas industry, the local economy had already been suffering for several years from falling oil prices. Now, acres of land have been abandoned by residents opting to use their insurance money to start fresh in places with better job prospects. After losing his home to the fire, Bilal Abbas is renting another one on the outskirts of the city. At this point, he's not sure he will rebuild in the area.
It worries me a lot, especially being a homeowner and an investor in this community myself, having my family here, being born here. When I look at my surroundings, we're not seeing the confidence in reinvestment into our community, and leaves me uncertain as to what my future will be here in Fort McMurray.
Uncertainty that extends to the rest of the region. Reconstruction costs here have already reached billions, and 15,000 people still remain unable to return home.
Next, it's hot, it's arid, and it's extremely dusty. From a distance, the Atacama Desert in northern Chile looks like just a load of sand and some piles of red rocks. But it's nevertheless a stretch of land that's got scientists and stargazers all of a flutter. If tiny bacteria and algae can exist in this tough climate and barren landscape, then why can't they exist elsewhere? And, more importantly, could there also be life on Mars? Take a look.
On the left, the planet Mars, seen by the robot Curiosity. On the right, the Atacama Desert in northern Chile. Two places with a surprising resemblance. The Atacama Desert is a playground for scientists. On little more than sunlight, tiny algae and bacteria evolved to survive in its parched earth. If they have done it here, then why not on Mars, 225 million kilometers away?
If the conditions are similar and there's life here, then if there's life on Mars, it's probably very similar.
Cristiana Dorador studies the DNA of those microorganisms to learn how they adapt to extreme environments.
If we can understand how these microorganisms live, how they live with these rocks, how they get moisture and adapt to these conditions, then when we have information about life forms on other planets, possibly in the near future, we will have our equivalent here on Earth.
The robot Curiosity has been looking for life on Mars for the past 4 years, with no success. A new machine will join him next year to search the planet's subsoil for traces of fossil life.
To study Mars is perhaps to understand how life was born on Earth. We still don't know exactly how it happened.
And liftoff.
NASA is even aiming to send people to the planet in 2030, which means a trip to the red planet is now more science than fiction.
And finally, to one of fashion's big nights out. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's Costume Institute Ball took place this week in New York City. This year's charity event honoured the Japanese creator of the Comme des Garçons empire. It was a chance for the big names from the worlds of celebrity, music and film to have a little bit of fun and experiment with their avant-garde sides. The R&B singer Rihanna and pop sensation Katy Perry were among those getting the camera bulbs flashing in their outfits. But social media was abuzz for perhaps all the wrong reasons when Pharrell Williams' wife was compared to a sofa or a Teletubby after she wore this red sculptured creation. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week for another Inside the Americas here on France 24.